The first person to be born on Mars was a baby girl by the name of Etta Shawn Brown in the bunker city of New Texas, modern-day Nula Nula. And due to her status as the first natively born person of a different planet, she essentially became an instant celebrity. Even today, her visage is a common motif on the flags and symbols of Martian colony states. Now, Etta Shawn Brown, along with the rest of her contemporaries, were born to the first wave of Martian colonization, taking place between the years of 2097 and 2164. But the problem with these first few colonies is that they never made any attempt of terraforming the Red Planet. Instead, they simply built a bunch of underground habitation units, protected both from the noxious atmosphere and the radioactive waves of their unburdened sun. Of course, there's nothing inherently wrong with this, but it does not change the fact that a colony built in this fashion is entirely reliant on supplies to be sent from Earth. And as some of you already know, the 2100s would ultimately end in a massive Earth-wide conflict called the Deaf Man's War. This conflict wound up killing so many people that the entirety of Earthling culture was dragged back to the technological Dark Age. And unsurprisingly, this also led to the total decimation of their interplanetary infrastructure. From there, it was only a matter of time before that first wave of Martian colonists had all died from hunger, thirst, or asphyxiation. About 1,000 years later, once the human race had climbed once again to their previous scale of technological prowess, work began on the second wave of Martian colonization. Much like the first, they started with air-sealed cities, buried beneath an unterraformed surface. But one technology that had actually improved since the days of Wave 1 was that of genetic modification. So while the original colonists were crammed, claustrophobic, and generally uncomfortable, a large portion of these new colonists had been specifically designed for their environment, with smaller frames and highly efficient lungs that required far less oxygen. A few of them also had their natural fear of tight spaces heavily diminished, although this was relatively rare since the practice of tweaking the human brain was highly taboo and outright illegal in many places. About 100 years after the founding of these second-wave colonies, an international committee called the Human Star Foundation was created back on Earth. The primary goal of the HSF was to populate the universe with as many groups of fully self-reliant humans as they possibly could, thereby making a species-wide extinction event nearly impossible. And since the second-wave Martians have seemingly failed to learn from the mistakes of Wave 1, the Star Foundation's first mission was to terraform Mars. Now, you would think that this would be a pretty non-controversial plan, especially to the people that actually live on Mars. But the problem is that one of the first steps in the terraforming process is flooding the planet with a giant ocean. And since the existing colonies never planned for this eventuality, a lot of them were shortly submerged beneath hundreds of feet of water. Most of these unfortunate holdings had to be abandoned, which not only caused a lot of immigration-related problems, but also the total loss of several incredibly expensive habitation units. Today, the only nation that has been successful in surviving beneath the waves is a Jamaican-based colony by the slightly ironic name of Utopia. Anyway, this process of forceful terraforming has led to a general distaste held by many members of the Martian populace against the HSF. But regardless of that tension, it is undeniable that the Star Foundation's interference has ultimately led to the largest and most successful wave of Martian colonization. Unlike any of the previous generations, the third wave colonists were unrestricted by spacesuits, hab units, or oxygen tanks, which all helped in founding an age of free exploration that was previously unimaginable on their planet. Every inch of dry land was quickly explored and conquered by a shifting tapestry of warring nations. And much like Wave 2, many members of the third wave have been modified for their native environment. But in place of the cramped, subterranean bunkers of old, these new Martians would live in luscious, sun-soaked jungles. In fact, the sun is still so bright that white skin is almost entirely useless in defending you from its harmful rays. Melanin of any amount, actually, is hardly enough to save you. So much so that the use of keratin has become increasingly popular, leading to the red-orange hue that many native Martians are known for. A similarly popular trait are large elephantine ears, used to fan any excess heat. This specific model of red skin and large ears was incredibly common, in large part due to its direct endorsement by the HSF. However, due to the aforementioned conflict between the Star Foundation and large populations of Martian natives, many people have been born with this HSF-endorsed body plan, only to resent it later in life. Lots of such people will actually dock their own ears as a form of subtle rebellion. At the same time, however, many HSF supporters with this body plan will accentuate their larger ears with jewelry and intricate tattoos as an indication of their conscious support. Okay, so there are plenty of other ideas that I could mention when it comes to my Martian world building, like the countless sacred shrines peppered across its surface, all dedicated to the remains of ancient rovers. Or, just as there are people today named Hope, Faith, and Joy, there are lots of native Martians named after the attributes and ideas venerated within their own culture, like curiosity, exploration, and insight. But the most important thing to understand, even though I've mentioned it a couple of times already, really is their conflict with the HSF. So far, you guys are probably on the Martian side, right? After all, the HSF caused massive amounts of damage in a cataclysm that sounds like it should have been pretty avoidable. But what you need to keep in mind is that this isn't really an issue of good guys versus bad guys. It's two complicated groups locked in conflict for complicated reasons. And despite what the propagandic speeches spewed by the majority of Martian politicians would have you believe, the HSF is not a horrid authoritarian nightmare. In fact, they don't hold any political power outside of the terraforming process, and once a planet has been fully terraformed, they basically just leave it alone. The only exception to this rule is their natural preservation chapter, which is basically the sci-fi equivalent to the fishing game. And the only reason that the HSF-controlled animal cops are allowed to maintain their power is because, well, they're the guys that actually made those animals in the first place, so it makes sense that they'd be the most well-informed when it comes to maintaining their environment. Now, with all that being said, the most common method in which anti-HSF activism is expressed on Mars is by randomly poaching a bunch of protected animals just to piss them off. So, yeah, not exactly the heroes we may have been expecting. As most of you already know, this video is just a small part of my larger biopunk project, and if you have enjoyed this project so far, please consider supporting me. Either by subscribing to the channel, sharing my videos to anyone you think may enjoy them as well, or if you can afford to, supporting me on Patreon, where for as little as $1 a month you will gain early access to all of my videos and exclusive access to a bunch of lore documents, ranging in topic from the creatures of the moon to the nations of Mars. Maybe I hid some extra details about that sunken city. Who knows? There's also a 7-day free trial, so as long as you're a fast enough reader, you can see everything I have to offer without paying a single cent. Anyway, the next episode of this project, another short story taking place during the largest conflict between the HSF and Martian militaries, will be released 1 week from today. The video after that, which describes my process in designing a biomechanical machine gun dog, will be released in 2 weeks, and in 3 I will be releasing my final video of the Martian saga. I'm releasing them a week apart from each other instead of a day, like I have in the past, just so I can aspire to a more consistent upload schedule. Hopefully you guys will like the change of pace. But without further ado, I would like to thank all of my current patrons, including Lord Frostdrake and the Deranged, Justin Chenkalpet, MTL, Edgy Electrokinetic, Boshaw, Evan Williams, Master T-Man 3, and Okalima. I would also like to briefly mention the countless people that have continued to help me with my world building projects over on the Discord server. They've given me a bunch of help while designing the Martian people, and while I haven't mentioned them in this video, they've been especially helpful in designing the Martian biomechs. Right now they're going pretty in depth with some Venus-related world building, which I'm sure will be mentioned more thoroughly in a future video. But for now, that's all I have. I hope you'll stick around for the upcoming installments, and until next time, don't die. I'll see you all later.